more and more countries are being very vocal and even starting to put together the foundations for de-dollarization. So while the US dollar has indeed strengthened off the backs of Europe, there's also been a lot of talks, even from countries like Saudi Arabia, trading in RMB with China around the oil trade between the two countries. You also have BRICS expanding over the course of the last year, including countries not only Saudi Arabia having interest, but Turkey, Algeria, Argentina, Iran. I'm wondering what you make of this trend toward de-dollarization. Maybe, Michael, you can begin when it comes to how the Ukraine proxy war has affected it.
Well, the sanction that we did not mention, of course, was the Americas' grabbing of all of Russia's foreign exchange dollar holdings in the United States and Europe. Whatever Russia held or Russian agencies held in Europe or the United States was simply confiscated. And the American State Department said, we are going to give that to Ukraine. Well, of course, you give it to Ukraine to do what? To pay back the United States for all of the foreign aid that we've given it and letting them fight our proxy war. So what this has done in conjunction with the Bank of England's seizure of Venezuela's gold stock is letting every country know, you've seen what we've done to Ukraine. If you get us angry at you, if you don't play by our rules-based order, then we can simply grab your money. We grabbed Iran's money right after the Shah was overthrown and made it a financial pariah. If you continue to use the US dollar, we're holding you hostage. We're holding the dollars hostage. So this has led every country outside of the United States and Western Europe to say, how do we handle our trade without using the dollar? Well, obviously, the very first attempts are currency swaps. Let's do trade in our own currencies. And then they're trying to create some means of mutual obligations for deficits in the trade between, let's say, the Near East, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Well, the problem is, if you de-dollarize, how can you create a currency to take its place? You can't do it through the International Monetary Fund because the United States has veto power in it, and the Monetary Fund is really a branch of the U.S. State Department and military. That's why the Monetary Fund is given grants to Ukraine. But one of the nice things about the IMF new loans to Ukraine is the IMF said, we don't have to obey our rules at all if we're doing something that the United States wants. Our rules say that we cannot make a loan to a country in a war. But Ukraine is different. We can make a loan to Ukraine. Our other rule, which is what led to much of our staff resigning in the Argentine financial crisis a few decades ago, was we cannot make a loan to a country that can't afford to pay back. Well, obviously, Ukraine is not going to be in any position at all to pay back. This double standard of the Ukraine enables all of the countries who owe the IMF money, Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, South Asia, to say, well, now that you've made it clear that the IMF is simply a branch of the United States Treasury, and we can't afford to pay you and still afford to import our oil and gas now that you've imposed sanctions that have raised the prices. Now that we can't afford to pay the dollar debts, now that the dollar has raised its interest rates and gone way up against global South currencies. So in order to survive, we're going to make trade among ourselves, and we can get the money to finance our trade among themselves by not paying the dollar debts. Well, the United States is going to respond by saying, if you go to other means of payments besides the dollar, then we will simply sanction you like we've sanctioned Russia, and we will cut you off from world trade. So that in order to de-dollarize, given the military and the political maneuvering that the United States is going to do, they have to become commercially independent of the United States and Western Europe for almost all of their imports, their food, their cars, their telephones, their electronics, everything that they basically need. They have to be able to make sure that there is no choke point in their trade of dependency on the United States that enables the United States to say, we can use this choke point to make your economy halt if you don't agree to trade in dollars and open your markets to the United States and pay these unpayably high dollarized debts by essentially privatizing your industry and selling it off. And you can pay the debts by selling what's left of your public infrastructure, your land, your raw materials, resources, your oil and gas and minerals. You'll get that money, and you'll use that money to pay American bondholders and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that has been giving you all the bad advice to become dependent on U.S. grain exports and general economic trade. So this is somehow, the de-dollarization isn't simply a technical issue of what kind of currency or arrangement are you going to make. It involves the whole economic system, which is why the Ukraine war has become so much more than a military confrontation, and has become has forced countries to think in terms of a totally restructuring their economy in a way that's independent from Western Europe and the United States, from the golden billion, as President Putin likes to call them.
Yeah, I mean, actually, before I'd like to say something about de-dollarization as well. But before I do that, I just want to say one thing about a subject we were discussing earlier, because it's really pertinent. Everybody will remember that some months ago, Western powers were making a big deal about permitting grain shipments from Ukraine. And everything was couched in terms of, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. All these poor third world countries depend on Ukrainian grain shipments and so on. But you know what the reality behind it? What was the real reason? Because I mean, it's not like Western countries have hearts are bleeding for third world countries. I mean, they've been squeezing third world countries for 2 centuries now. But the point is, the main reason why they are so eager to get grain shipments out of Ukraine is a fact that few people know. A large part of the farming, even before Ukrainian land could be sold, it was allowed to be leased. So as a consequence, Western big agribusiness corporations are heavily invested in Ukraine. And even many corporations that are apparently Ukrainian are headquartered and have interests, involve Western interests and so on. So this was the grain of this agribusiness that had to get out. And I think, again, we always have to look for the real motivations. I think people should really understand, all these pronouncements about aiding Ukraine and so on they're all hollow in some respect or another. But anyway, coming to de-dollarization, let me also plug the fact that next week around Michael and I, around this time, Michael and I are going to record our program on de-dollarization. So if you're interested, please listen to that. But you see, I would like to start really at a very fundamental level, because what we will not understand what is happening under the rubric of de-dollarization, or not fully understand it, unless we consider a very simple point. It is not possible to have the currency of one country be the currency of the world. People say, oh, what about the dollar and what about sterling? Well, the point is, each of these has not only had special circumstances. In the case of sterling, essentially, Britain was providing the world with liquidity by exporting the surpluses it extracted from its empire, both directly as taxation and indirectly in the sense that all the trade surpluses that its empire was incurring with the rest of the world by, essentially producing their guts out to send, food and tea and all sorts of raw materials and cotton, etc., to the rest of the world market. India was the second biggest exporter in the world at the time, and so it was earning a lot of foreign exchange for and capital for Britain, and so all of this was being sent. So Britain could do it because it had an empire. Otherwise, what was tiny little Britain ever going to do, even at the height of its industrial power? And the dollar never really succeeded in the post-war period. I mean, it spent basically a crisis-ridden period in the 50s and 60s, and then the gold link had to be broken. And since then, the dollar has only remained the world's currency by creating artificial demand for the dollar, by expanding financialization, and of course, a third thing, which is essentially preventing third world development. Because what third world development would do, if third world countries really develop, is increase the competition to purchase commodities. Increased competition to purchase commodities would mean higher prices of commodities. Higher prices of commodities, as those who have watched these things know, is inversely related to the value of the dollar. So in this sense, this is the most fundamental point I want to make. And then, of course, I would say I completely agree with everything that Michael said. And I would say, add to that, that basically, what is it about the Ukraine war that has done this? So if you take what I said seriously, then you will also understand that the dollar's position has been weakening for some time now. And also, and so what the Ukraine war has done is it has accelerated that position, and that weakening comes from a multitude of sources, including the fact that the financialization scheme, the idea that we can simply expand international demand for the dollar by expanding financialization and inviting everybody into the giant casino that is the dollar-denominated financial system, even this is not working, because after 2008, foreign money has basically not been coming in, which is partly why the Federal Reserve has had to support all these asset markets. So in that sense, it has been weakening. And yes, then what has also happened is that the rest of the world has seen that the rest of the world had many complaints about the dollar system anyway, because it works completely in ways that are governed by the US requirements. So when the US interest rates are low, money floods out of the US into the so-called emerging markets, driving up the value of emerging market currencies. And then when the dollar, when they increase interest rates, then the money rushes back to the United States. So this kind of dollar system is of no good. It does not provide stable finance. So the big thing that's driving the decline or the de-dollarization is that now there are alternatives. China is an alternative source of finance, which is far superior to anything the USS can offer. And as Michael says, the countries are also realizing that they cannot rely on this crazy casino system, and they need more stable arrangements amongst themselves, and they are creating them. And one final point, which is that the weaponization of the dollar system, not only in the case of Russia, but remember there was also the they sequestered Afghan reserves, and they are subjecting Afghanistan to the most inhuman forms of starvation, lack of medical equipment, etc., etc. They've done similar things to Venezuela, Argentina, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. It just goes to show how connected what's going on in Ukraine is to the rest of the world, and how much, China calls them headwinds. There's been a huge fallout from the Ukraine proxy war, and de-dollarization is for sure one of them. Michael, how will this process, do you think, play out? Like, there's a lot of different I think, theories about how fast this will go, whether the dollar will be replaced in the next 5-10 years, or maybe it'll take several decades. How do you see this development moving forward, given that it feels like we're going to be in the midst of this proxy war for some time, despite whatever, uh, you know, references to a peace deal and to peace that the U.S. and NATO have been making of late. It feels like this is going to go on for quite a while. So how do you see this going? I mean, I know we can't predict the future, but I guess there are some trends that maybe can
I,
point the way forward.
yeah, can I wonder about that. I
Well,
think that there are.
Radhika, let's let Michael,
Oh, sorry.
because let him first, and then you can follow up for sure.
Okay.
Oh, oh no, I'm about to say something, and the dollar is not going to be replaced to disappear. The dollar will remain the center of the American and the European trade. The problem is what can take its place? Well, what can take its place has to be a systemic answer. Any foreign currency is given basically value by being accepted as payment for debt or payment to the government. If the government accepts the currency, that creates a demand for the money that it creates. Now, if the key is you establish a currency's value by taxes, taxes are something that are political. In order to have a common currency, you need to have an intergovernmental arrangement for political agreement on what will the taxes be paid for? Who will receive the taxes? It almost imposes a political union among the countries that are using a foreign currency, unless what they arrange is simply a group of bilateral swap agreements, like Saudi Arabia is making with Russia and various countries are making with China, or a kind of artificial something like Keynes's proposal for special drawing rights that a new alternative to the IMF will create. I know Radhika will have something to say about this. An alternative that will create artificial currency. The question is, how do you give this artificial currency a value outside of the countries that are using it? You're going to have two different you can almost say two different civilizations, which is how Lavrov and Putin have been saying it. You're going to have one part of the world developing independently of the United States with a mixed economy, basically moving towards socialism, and the neoliberalized, financialized United States. These will be rival political systems and really a whole different way of organizing the economy, politics, and values. And that's going to be much harder to put in place than simply doing a technical financial arrangement. It was easy for countries to break away from the SWIFT bank clearing system, and the United States threats had given Russia and China time to put in place their own bank currency system, their own credit card system, all of the financial details, but to have the balance of debt between countries. When countries have an imbalance in trade and investment, if China is going to develop infrastructure all along the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance, other countries are not going to be able to pay immediately. Ultimately, these equity investments that China's making will generate enough revenue to pay them off. But how are you going to handle this in currency, these mutual debts in the interim? That's what has to be developed, and it's a political question that most countries have not asked, especially if they've sent their students to the United States or England to learn economics, when the economic curriculum doesn't even discuss the kind of things that we've been discussing here for the last hour. For your audience, they don't discuss the political context for what a market is. They don't discuss how a government, a group of governments can create their own market relations and means of payment and means of debt settlement. So all of this is going to be linked to how do you handle the imbalances in trade and investment that develop among countries that decide we've got to go it by ourselves. We've got to be independent from the United States. And if the United States says you don't use the dollar, then you can't import anything from us in Europe. they've got to be prepared to really start all over. And the good thing is, if they start all over, it doesn't have to be the way that the United States and Europe developed. It doesn't have to be Margaret Thatcher's way that Europe and Ukraine and the United States has followed. It doesn't have to be the neoliberal way. It can be the way in which socialists have talked about for the last 150 years.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, I mean, Danny, your original question was, do you think the dollar system will go away now, soon, later? I think that and Michael, part of Michael's answer was that it's quite possible that it will remain the currency of this Western bloc. But remember, the Western bloc already has in it the euro. And also, of course, other stronger currencies. So I think that that's something we have to bear in mind. One of the things that, and also financial relations between Europe and the United States are not as strong as you might think, because basically what happened in the first decade of the 21st century is that as the US financial system was inflating those crazy asset bubbles based on the mortgage-backed securities and so on, the big buyers of these asset-backed securities, these toxic securities, of course, they American corporations and financial corporations were among the big buyers. But outside the United States, UK and Eurozone financial institutions bought into this market in a big way. And in fact, that is why also they were the ones that were hurt the most. So, when people refer to what happened in 2008 as the global financial crisis, I always say there was nothing global about it. It was a North Atlantic financial crisis. And so that's, and interestingly, as the English expression goes, once bitten, twice shy. What we have seen thereafter, as various reports have pointed out, is that European countries have not been investing in American financial markets quite as much. They have sort of retracted. The flow of money from Europe to the United States is massively down. So that means that the United States, for the US to function as a dollar system, it has to actually have inflows from elsewhere, which are not coming, which, as I said, requires the Federal Reserve to support asset markets. Now that is proving difficult in the present inflationary context. So the US is caught in a vice. And as a result of that, I think there may be some dysfunction there, which may lead to a collapse of the dollar. We don't know. But so that's the one thing. And I also agree with Michael that, of course, the other thing that is accelerating the move away from the dollar, and that acceleration can suddenly become, very significant, and that is the availability of alternatives. Now, earlier I had said that a national currency cannot be the world currency. Keynes knew that, and he arrived at the Bretton Woods conference with proposals for Bancor, not SDR, Bancor, which is just the name he gave to this currency. And the key thing about this currency was that it was not a currency you and I can use to buy a chocolate bar. Okay, it was a currency only to be used between central banks. And I think this kind of arrangement can be made on a bilateral, multilateral, many different types of basis. And I think that this is how, for example, the Argentine arrangement that has been made, the Argentine and Brazilian arrangement that has recently been made, has been criticized by people who don't know these sorts of things. They're saying, it's just a central bank currency, it can't be worth much. But no, money is national. Keynes understood this. And what we need is a way of settling imbalances between central banks. That's what world money needs to do primarily. We don't need world money to pay for restaurant meals or buy a chocolate bar or shop for shoes or whatever. That money can remain national. And I think that that's what Keynes understood, and that has been forgotten with all the hype about how natural it is for the US to be the world's money. It's not natural at all. It's based on a whole bunch of shenanigans, which, some of which we don't even know about. So in that sense, I think that as these arrangements multiply, which I think they will for reasons we've already talked about, there's also going to be a move away from the dollar. And at that point, we'll not really even care what the dollar's worth. I mean, how much do we care what is the worth of I don't know, the Korean won? We don't worry about it. Koreans worry about it, and that's what will happen.
Well, what are we going to do about the backlog of dollarized debt that countries have? Their foreign debt has been denominated in dollars. They can't; these debts cannot be repaid and have these countries develop independence from the United States. Something has to give. And not paying the foreign debt because you're using your money to develop your own economic independence, your agricultural independence, your industrial independence. If that is given priority, then the United States is going to sort of force a split. That's the problem that has to be solved.
Yes, and I think that you're right. And the United States will try to resolve this by force. But I think what may also happen, of course, is that if countries stop incurring new debt in dollars, then this will look very different.
Yes.